while in this entire NMP, the asset monetization, or called a privatization of the brownfield assets. When I say brownfield, it's essentially the assets which are have been built a long back and currently in operation. Uh, so these leasing these assets would generate a certain value, um, and this would help in creating the greenfield assets under an IP. So this entire process or the cycle does make sense, definitely, but a lot of questions arises, right? Let's look some of those questions. The first most important question, very important, is why lease? Why not sell? Why not make a clean sell? For example, hypothetically speaking, instead of leasing 100 assets, sell 10 assets at the appropriate deserving price and get done with it. Why lease? And the many economists, including Kaushik Basu, also has questioned this, that this entire game of lease would not work, and I would also agree with it, and I would be sharing a lot of more details on this when I talk about the UK or the Britain example. Second question is, how many of these assets have a life which is way more than the lease period? If we assume, or probably if the life of these assets more or less are similar to the period of lease, then what is the point of lease again? Just sell them. Three, in how many instances we have seen the government has taken back the assets after leasing for 20-30 years. For example, all these hotels that we talk about, I not necessary that I name those examples now, but we do know that we have given these palaces and they got converted into hotels. In how many instances we have taken back? So again, a point to say that lease is essentially it's a sale, but we are generating much lesser revenue. It's a sale which would generate essentially generating a lease worth of value, right? Which is definitely not efficient. Then the next question, which essentially is again a very important question, like, is it the right time to do this? Because the economy is not that great, it's in doldrums. So would these assets generate the deserving potential? That's a question even the BJP MP Subramanian Swamy has been asking about. So it's a very important question. Is it the right time to do it? Then the next question is about the unemployment, right? The unemployment in this particular during the COVID times has increased. It's about 10%. So when we are privatizing or asset monetizing, essentially the private players would try to run things in a much more efficient manner. And when I say efficiency, which most likely also means those job cuts. So when the logic sense tells us that during the pandemic or during when economy is so down, we should drive factors that increase employment. Thus, asset monetization is a path in an opposite direction where the unemployment might increase. To this, some of them would counter question that anyway, government is not a huge employer. It hardly employs less than 10%. So how does it even matter? To that, I think I'm not sure. I'm in on this particular point, but I assume that most of these jobs are contractual jobs in these particular assets, right? Because most of these operations are given as a contracts to different players. So these, I believe, should be contractual jobs, and after privatization, definitely those jobs would be reduced to improve efficiencies. So this particular the reduction of jobs cannot be directly linked to that 10% government employment ratios, right? So this is a different category uh, from where the job loss may probably have consumer interest, right? It's largely observed that once a certain asset is privatized or call it monetized, the burden on end consumer usually increases. For example, the toll booths, we do know that how pricey they have become, right? So how the question arises, how will the government ensure that this doesn't happen? Most likely this will not happen, and I'll explain how the open market kind of ensures that the balance is maintained when I talk about the Britain's example. Then the question arises, like, are these assets not generating any value currently? And if they're generating some value currently, uh, has that been considered or factored into this calculating this 6 lakh crores? Extending that question, how did uh, how did they estimated a certain revenue potential for assets which are being leased, not sale? What do they have a parallels to weigh upon? Further extending this question, how did we even estimate the value of these assets which are going under lease for 10, 20 years? In this fast changing world, some assets might become mm, very, very high value of worth, whereas some assets might be worth less. So how we have done that approximation here? Mm, then um, then the question of the entire question of OPEX and CAPEX. Let me explain what is OPEX and CAPEX. OPEX is essentially the operational expenditure, and CAPEX is the capital expenditure. And the government, the NMP plan is very clear that all the revenue that is being generated by NMP would go only into capex, which is capital expenditure, by which I mean it will be invested in infrastructure building and will not be used in funding the operational expenses of the government, which is the OPEX part. That said, then the question arises, currently Indian we are running a deficit of 5.5 lakh crore this particular year. So what is the guarantee that government will not use this revenue in bridging that fiscal deficit? For our argument's sake, we'll assume that government will not do that. Okay, let's keep that question aside. I think that most of these assets that are being put for monetization may already be having some bank liabilities on it. When I say that bank liabilities, essentially the bank loans on it. So it's not very clear that with the revenue being generated through monetization would close those loans, which essentially means then it would become a OPEX, not a CAPEX. So this is not very clear from the document released by the government. Then another question which is bothering me a lot is the NMP is generating 6 lakhs crore, um, whereas NIP needs around 20 lakh crores. Even if when we're considering the 15 to 20% of NIP is coming from NMP. So how do you bridge that gap between 6 to 20 lakh crores? This is also not very clear. Then the other crucial question comes here is, and many who argue against privatization also points out this particular question, that what about the strategic assets? How do we ensure the national interest is maintained while these strategic assets go under the hammer? I will explain this in the UK example. And the last question that I have is how about the monopolies and oligarchies? Will this entire process create big monopolies and much fear the oligarchies. And I would explain the oligarchy with an example, with the example of Soviet Union or probably the Russia's example.